The room was quiet except for the soft humming of the air conditioner. Dr. James leaned over the frail body lying on the hospital bed. The old man's eyes were dull, his skin pale and thin like paper. He looked tired but calm. "Doctor," the man said, his voice barely above a whisper, "don't worry about me. I know I'm going to die." James adjusted the man's pillow gently and tried to offer a reassuring smile, but the old man raised his wrinkled hand weakly and waved it off. "I didn't want to come here, you know. They brought me here. My children. They said I needed help. But I've made peace with everything." James pulled a chair closer and sat beside the bed. The man's name was Mr. Jeremiah. He had been admitted 2 days ago with complications from kidney failure. Now he seemed more interested in speaking than being treated. "Look at my hair," Mr. Jeremiah chuckled softly. "Well, what's left of it? It's all gone. I'm old now, and you're so young." James nodded politely. "Yes, sir, but I'm here to help you feel better," he said kindly. Mr. Jeremiah smiled faintly. "You want to help me? Then just listen. Let me tell you a few things I've learned in this life. If you don't mind." James leaned in closer, curiosity in his eyes. "Of course, sir. I'd love to hear." The old man's eyes softened. "Before I leave this world, I want to share something worth remembering." Mr. Jeremiah took a slow breath and shifted his gaze to the ceiling. "When I was 4 years old," he began, "I thought the world was all about me. Everything had to go my way. I cried when I wanted something, and I smiled when I got it." He looked at James. "Children are selfish, doctor. But it's not their fault. That's how we all start." James smiled. "I suppose that's true. At 14, Jeremiah continued, I wanted to rule the world. I believed I would be the greatest man to ever live. I thought I would change everything, become a king or a president." His eyes twinkled with a faint memory. "At 21, I said I must become the richest man alive. Not just rich. Wealthy beyond reason. I dreamt of houses in every country, cars in every shade." James chuckled. "Sounds like big dreams." "They were," the old man nodded. "At 25, I just wanted to find love. I was tired of chasing power. I thought love would make me happy." His smile faded slightly. "Then when I turned 40, I told myself, maybe happiness comes from helping people. So I made that my mission." Mr. Jeremiah turned his head slowly to face James. "You see, doctor, I wanted many things at different times in my life. Dreams kept changing. Desires shifted. But one thing stayed the same." "What was that?" James asked, genuinely interested. "I wanted to be happy," Jeremiah said softly. "And I thought the best way to be happy was to do what others said would make me happy." James leaned back thoughtfully. "You mean you followed people's advice instead of your own heart?" "Yes," the old man replied with a weak nod. "When it was time to choose a course in the university, I wanted to study zoology. I loved animals. I dreamed of working with nature. But everyone around me said, 'Study engineering. That's where the money is. You'll become a great engineer.'" "And you listened?" James asked. "I did," Jeremiah said. "But there was no one to pay my fees. I had to work and study at the same time. By my 3rd year I was exhausted. Couldn't keep up. I dropped out." James frowned slightly. "That must have been hard." "It was," Mr. Jeremiah replied. "But do you know the worst part?" "What's that?" James asked. "The same people who told me to study engineering came back and said, 'You should have studied zoology. That's what you loved.'" He let out a weak laugh that quickly turned into a cough. James handed him a glass of water, which he sipped slowly. "I was angry," Jeremiah continued. "Not just at them but at myself. Why didn't I listen to what I truly wanted?" James nodded slowly, beginning to understand where the story was going. "You ignored yourself." "Exactly," Jeremiah said. "And that was just the beginning. When I turned 28, Jeremiah went on, everyone started saying it was time to marry. 'Get a wife,' they said. You need a home. You need children. So I listened again. I married a woman I barely knew. She was beautiful and polite, but we had no real connection. James listened closely, his expression serious. 6 years into that marriage, Jeremiah said, his voice growing bitter. I came home one afternoon and found her in bed with our neighbor. I stood at the door, frozen. I asked her why she did it. Do you know what she did? James shook his head slowly. She slapped me, Jeremiah said with a sad chuckle. She didn't say a word. Just slapped me. I was too shocked to respond. I didn't even raise my voice. James looked at the old man with pity. What did you do next? I left the house, Jeremiah replied. I needed space to think. Just a few hours to breathe. When I came back, she was gone. She took everything, our children, their clothes, even the photo albums. Just vanished. James sighed. That must have hurt deeply. It did, Jeremiah admitted. More than I can describe. I walked around like a ghost for weeks. Everyone kept saying, you should have taken your time before marrying. He laughed bitterly. The same people who pushed me into it were now blaming me for listening. He turned his face back to the ceiling. I was 34, and I had lost my education, my family, and my peace. All because I trusted voices outside more than the one inside me. Then came my 40s, Jeremiah said quietly. I had a breakthrough. I got a big government contract. Money started flowing in. My name was in the newspapers. People called me chairman. Suddenly, everyone remembered I existed. James raised his eyebrows. That must have felt good at least. At first, yes, the old man said. They all came with smiles and stories. My wife is in the hospital. My son needs school fees. My roof is leaking. Every day it was something new. I helped them all, trusting they'd pay me back. James tilted his head. And they didn't. Not one of them, Jeremiah said. Because of that, I couldn't finish the contract. The deadline passed. The client sued me for breach. I went to jail for 6 years. James was stunned. You went to jail? Just like that? Yes, Jeremiah replied calmly. And do you know who visited me during those 6 years? James hesitated. Your family. The old man shook his head. No one. Not a single soul. The same people who were always at my door disappeared like smoke. I spent those years thinking about everything. How I lost myself trying to please everyone. That must have been a lonely time, James murmured. It was, Jeremiah agreed. But it was also the time I started to hear my own voice again. The silence in that prison was heavy. But in that silence, I found my thoughts. Mr. Jeremiah turned slightly in bed, wincing from the movement. James stood to adjust his pillow and gently helped him lie back comfortably. The old man sighed in relief. Thank you, son. You've been kind to me. I'm just doing my job, sir, James replied. No, Jeremiah smiled faintly. You're doing more than your job. You're listening. That's rare. He looked out the window briefly. You see, the biggest mistake I made in life was not listening to myself. I kept ignoring that small voice inside me. I thought other people knew better. I thought they loved me more than I loved myself. James sat down again, reflecting on the words. Just trying to do what was right, sir. I know, Jeremiah said. But sometimes the right thing is not what others say. It's what your own soul whispers. He looked James in the eye. Let me tell you something I learned too late. It's good to ask for advice. It's wise to seek counsel. But it's dangerous, very dangerous, to silence your own heart. James nodded slowly. I think I understand what you mean. Do you? Jeremiah asked softly. Because if you do, then when you go home tonight, sit down. Don't rush. Take a glass of water. Sit in your room. You can close your eyes if you want or keep them open. But talk to yourself. Not in madness, but in reflection. James was quiet, letting the words sink in. Reason with yourself, Jeremiah said. Tell yourself the truth, your truth. Because in the end, The only person who will always be there with you is you. James sat in silence for a while. The soft beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound in the room. "You speak with so much clarity, sir," he said. "Did it all come to you while in prison?" Jeremiah gave a weak smile. "Not just in prison. Started there. But clarity grows with pain. And I've had plenty of that." James leaned forward. "Did you ever try to rebuild your life after prison?" "I did," Jeremiah nodded slowly. "But I was already in my 50s. The world had moved on. My name was no longer a thing people cheered for. I knocked on old doors, none opened. I called old friends, none picked." "Didn't your family help you?" James asked. Jeremiah chuckled dryly. "My family. The same ones who brought me here. They only remembered me when my kidneys failed. They didn't want me dying in their homes. So they brought me here. 'Let the hospital take care of him,' they said." There was bitterness in Jeremiah's voice, but it was the kind that had long grown quiet. Not rage but resignation. "You know, doctor," he said, "a man learns what love is when he has nothing left." James looked at him gently. "And what is love, sir?" Jeremiah smiled faintly. "Love is truth. And truth is not always kind. But it's always faithful. My mistake was confusing attention for love. When I had money, I had attention. When I lost everything, truth came, ugly and raw." He paused to catch his breath. "I don't hate them. My children. My family. My so-called friends. I just know better now. I know who I am. I know I failed myself when I let others decide my life." James nodded slowly, letting the wisdom settle into his mind. He had heard many things in medical school, but this was something deeper than science. "Doctor," Jeremiah said again after a long silence, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, sir," James replied. "How old are you?" "I'm 32, James answered. The old man smiled knowingly. "That's the age when life starts to whisper louder. You'll soon find that everyone will have something to say about what you should be doing. They'll talk about your job, your marriage, your children, even your haircut." James laughed softly. "I've already started hearing those whispers." "Then promise me something," Jeremiah said, lifting one trembling hand. James gently held it. "What is it?" "Listen to your soul more than their noise," Jeremiah said firmly. "Because when you lie on a bed like this one day, it won't be their voices you hear. It'll be yours." James felt a strange tightness in his chest. The words struck something deep inside him. He thought of his parents, always reminding him to marry soon. He thought of his senior colleagues pushing him to take a government position he didn't want. He thought of the girl he loved but left behind because she wasn't from a good enough family. "I wish I met you earlier," James said quietly. Jeremiah smiled. "You're meeting me exactly when you need to. Life has a way of bringing people together at the right time." James leaned back in the chair, arms crossed, eyes thoughtful. "Why do people stop listening to themselves, sir?" "Because we're trained to doubt ourselves," Jeremiah replied. "From childhood we're told what's right and wrong, what's possible and impossible. Our instincts are replaced with instructions." Jeremiah turned his head slowly. "When you were a child, what did you want to be?" James thought for a second. "I wanted to be an artist." "An artist?" Jeremiah smiled. "What happened?" "My parents said it wasn't a real career, that I should study medicine. So I did." "Do you enjoy medicine?" "I do," James said honestly. "But sometimes I still sketch. I still dream of colors." Jeremiah's eyes lit up. "Then don't lose that. No matter what happens, don't throw away the voice that paints your joy." James looked down. "It's hard to balance." "It's always hard," Jeremiah said. "But the truth inside you is worth protecting, even if it means walking alone sometimes." There was a knock on the door. A nurse walked in quietly to check the drip. Jeremiah smiled at her and whispered, "Thank you, my dear." The nurse nodded politely and left just as quickly as she came. James stood up. "Do you want to rest a bit?" Jeremiah shook his head. No. Let me talk while I still can. My breath is short, but my heart is full. James sat again. I'm here, sir. I'm listening. Jeremiah closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them slowly. I used to think wisdom came from books. Now I know it comes from pain. Every scar is a teacher. Every loss is a lesson. James nodded. What's the biggest lesson of all? Jeremiah smiled. That nothing is more dangerous than abandoning yourself. You can lose money, Jeremiah continued. You can lose friends. You can lose your job, your reputation, even your family. But never lose your voice. James whispered. Your voice? Yes, the old man said. The part of you that tells you the truth, even when the world shouts lies. James sat back, the words sinking deeper. Jeremiah looked at him. When you go back to your room tonight, take off your coat. Sit by the window. Let the night breeze hit your skin. And ask yourself, am I living my truth? James looked unsure. And what if I'm not? Then start to, Jeremiah said simply. Start in small ways. Say no when you mean no. Say yes when your heart agrees. That's how it begins. The wind outside rustled the hospital curtains. The room was quiet again. James felt as if time had slowed. Jeremiah let out a tired breath. There was a time I thought I was wise. I read all the right books. Attended all the right events. I wore suits, gave speeches. But wisdom doesn't live in noise. It hides in silence. James listened, deeply drawn to every word. I wish I had slowed down sooner, Jeremiah said. But I was always running, chasing approval, chasing success. And in the end, I lost what mattered most. What mattered most? James asked softly. Jeremiah's voice cracked slightly. Peace. I lost my peace. James reached for the water jug and poured another glass. Jeremiah took a slow sip, then leaned his head back. Do you believe in God? Jeremiah asked suddenly. James nodded. Yes, I do. Then know this, Jeremiah said. After God, the next voice you must never ignore is your own. James blinked, surprised. People say listen to your parents, your pastors, your elders. And yes, you should. But if your own soul is screaming something different, pay attention. 'Cause God speaks through peace. If your heart is troubled, He's trying to tell you something. James nodded slowly. That's powerful, sir. It's not mine, Jeremiah whispered. It's truth. Jeremiah closed his eyes again, resting for a few seconds. You know, doctor, he said, you've been good to me. Most doctors just rush in, check numbers and leave. But you stayed. James smiled humbly. You're teaching me things I didn't learn in medical school. That's because life is the real school, Jeremiah said. And the final exam is death. I'm just trying to help you pass it early. James swallowed hard. Thank you, sir. Jeremiah smiled faintly. Thank me by living true. Not loud, not perfect. Just true. The night had deepened, and the soft buzz of the fluorescent light made the room feel even more still. James checked the 4 slowly, more out of nervous habit than necessity. Mr. Jeremiah gave him a knowing look. You remind me of my younger self, the old man said. Quiet, thoughtful, always trying to do the right thing. James smiled politely. I'm not sure I always get it right. No one ever does, Jeremiah replied. But it's not about being perfect. It's about being honest with yourself. He shifted slightly on the bed. His breath shaky but his mind still clear. There's something I should have told my children before I got this sick. Maybe they'd understand me better now. What's that? James asked. That it's not selfish to live your own life, Jeremiah said softly. We're taught that sacrifice is love. But some sacrifices destroy you. James tilted his head. So you believe in putting yourself first? I believe in balance, Jeremiah corrected. Love others, yes. Give to others. But don't pour from an empty cup. Refill yourself first. Jeremiah's gaze drifted to the ceiling again. His voice was weaker now, but still steady. I used to think people who chose themselves were arrogant, selfish. But now I envy them. They had courage. James sat back in his chair, listening closely. I stayed in relationships I should have walked away from. I stayed in jobs that drained me. I said yes when I wanted to scream no. All because I wanted to be liked. James nodded slowly. That's something I think a lot of people can relate to. Jeremiah smiled. The problem is, when you finally break down, the people you were trying to please will leave. You'll be alone with the damage. There was a pause before he added, so please don't wait until your body fails before you start protecting your peace. James leaned forward. I'm hearing you, sir. And I'll remember. Good, Jeremiah said, closing his eyes briefly. Then my words won't be wasted. Jeremiah opened his eyes again, slower this time. Do you know why people fear old age? He asked quietly. James thought for a moment. Maybe because they're afraid of dying. Jeremiah shook his head gently. No, people fear old age because it comes with reflection. Forces you to look back. And most people don't like what they see. James frowned slightly. You mean regrets? Exactly, Jeremiah replied. Regret is a silent killer. It doesn't take your life, but it steals your peace. He coughed lightly, and James helped him sit up a little. You know what I regret most? Jeremiah asked. James waited. I regret all the times I wanted to laugh and didn't. All the days I wanted to rest but pushed myself. All the times I wanted to say, I love you, but stayed silent. I had a son, Jeremiah said suddenly. His eyes growing distant. James's ears perked up. What happened to him? He was just 10 when his mother left with him, the old man said. I tried to find him. I really did. But I had no money, no support. And after a while, she disappeared. That's terrible, James said gently. Jeremiah nodded. I had dreams of seeing him again. Of telling him that his father wasn't perfect, but he tried. But now I don't think I'll get that chance. James looked down. You never heard from him? Not once, Jeremiah replied. I don't even know if he's alive. But every day I think of him. He wiped a tear from the corner of his eye. That's the thing about life, doctor. The pain you ignore today will visit you tomorrow, older and heavier. The room felt heavy with silence. James wanted to say something, anything, but nothing came. Jeremiah looked over at him with kind eyes. You're lucky, doctor. You still have time. James swallowed the lump in his throat. Yes, sir. Use it well, Jeremiah continued. Time is a thief that wears a smile. It keeps walking while you're busy pleasing others. James nodded slowly. People ask me if I'd go back and change things, the old man said. I wouldn't. But if I could send a letter to my younger self, I'd write just one line. What would it say? James asked. Jeremiah gave a faint smile. Listen to yourself. That's it. That's simple. Jeremiah closed his eyes again, this time for longer. James thought he had drifted off, but then he spoke, quieter than before. I wonder what my son looks like now. I wonder if he has my nose. James's heart broke a little more. Maybe he's looking for you too, sir. Maybe he'll come. I hope so, Jeremiah whispered. I hope he grows up to be better than I was. Martyr. Older. Kinder. James reached out and gently held the old man's frail hand. You're a good man, James said. You're leaving something behind in me. I'll carry your words. Jeremiah smiled weakly. Then maybe I've not lived in vain. The wind blew softly through the slightly open window, bringing in a calm night breeze. Jeremiah inhaled gently, his chest rising with effort. You know, he said, the most peaceful people I've met in life were not the richest, not the most educated, just the most honest with themselves. James nodded slowly. Peace doesn't come from success, comes from alignment. When your actions match your values. Jeremiah looked at James. You still draw, don't you? James blinked. Yes, sir. Sometimes. Then draw, Jeremiah said. Draw when you're tired. Draw when you're scared. Draw because it reminds you who you are. Ames smiled softly, remembering the sketchbook tucked away in his drawer at home. I gave up on it, he said. I thought it was childish. Jeremiah shook his head slowly. Anything that gives you peace is never childish. He coughed lightly again, and James stood to adjust his pillow. You've helped me remember something important, James said. And what is that? Jeremiah asked. That I don't have to live someone else's idea of a good life. Jeremiah grinned faintly. Exactly, my boy. That's the first step to real freedom. I'm tired now, Jeremiah whispered. But my mind is light. James nodded, standing beside him. Would you like me to pray with you, sir? The old man smiled. Yes, please. James bowed his head, closed his eyes, and prayed in a low, steady voice. When he finished, he looked up to see tears slipping down Jeremiah's cheeks. Thank you, the old man whispered. That was beautiful. James gently wiped his face. Rest now, sir. You've done enough. Jeremiah closed his eyes and murmured. Just one last thing. James leaned in closely. What is it? Jeremiah opened his eyes slowly. Tell my son, if he ever finds me, that I always loved him. That I was just a man who made mistakes, but he was never one of them. James's eyes welled up. I'll tell him, sir. I promise. Jeremiah smiled, a soft, peaceful smile that stayed on his face even as his eyes closed again. The machines beeped softly beside him. James stayed by his side, holding his hand in silence, honoring a man who had finally made peace with himself. James remained seated beside the bed long after Mr. Jeremiah had fallen into sleep. He wasn't sure if it was sleep or something deeper, quieter. The old man's hand was still in his, warm but slowly losing strength. James stared at the wrinkled face that had just poured out decades of wisdom in a few quiet hours. He leaned back in the chair, thoughts swirling. He had come into the room as a doctor, expecting to adjust charts and walk out. Instead, he had been given a mirror, a life's mirror. Mr. Jeremiah hadn't just told a story. He had opened a door into every man's journey. The fear of missing out, the pressure to perform, the ache of loneliness even in a crowd. James felt it all. He looked at the clock. 3:17 a.m. Outside, the city was silent. Inside, 1,000 voices rang in James's head, but one was louder than the rest. His own. James stepped outside the ward quietly, closing the door behind him. The hallway lights flickered dimly, casting long shadows. He walked slowly toward the nurse's station, his hands in his coat pockets. Dr. James. One of the nurses called softly. He turned. Yes. We'll keep checking on him every hour, she said. You should go rest. James nodded. Thank you. Let me know immediately if there's any change. He turned again and walked down the corridor. But rest didn't feel like an option. Something inside him was wide awake. He found an empty office, entered quietly, and sat by the window. For a moment, he did exactly what Mr. Jeremiah had advised. He breathed, he closed his eyes, and he listened. There, in the stillness, he felt something shift. Quiet resolve. A whisper from his own heart. You have time. But not forever. By the next morning, James returned to the ward early. The sun hadn't fully risen, and a golden hue spilled softly through the window. Mr. Jeremiah was still asleep, his breathing slower now. A nurse nearby whispered. He's been still since 5 a.m. We think he's fading gently. James nodded, walking closer. He sat by the bed again and gently touched the old man's hand. Sir, he whispered. You told me not to waste time. So I won't. I'm going to do better. With my life, with my choices, with myself. He brought out a small notepad from his pocket, the one he used to jot down prescriptions. But this time, he turned it to a blank page and wrote, After God, listen to yourself. Then below that, "Thank you, Mr. Jeremiah." By 8:06 a.m., Mr. Jeremiah was gone, peacefully, quietly, just as he had lived his final moments. James stood beside the bed as the nurses prepared the body. He stayed silent, head bowed, eyes closed. It felt like he was saying goodbye to more than just a patient. It felt like saying goodbye to a mentor, a teacher, a voice he never knew he needed. The hospital's paperwork began, but James wasn't focused on that. Instead, he thought about the words, the weight of them. He felt an invisible responsibility resting on his chest. Not a burden but a mission. Mr. Jeremiah had died alone, but not forgotten. His story was alive now, breathing in James. And James promised himself he wouldn't let that story die. Later that afternoon, James sat on a bench just outside the hospital. The sky was bright but gentle. Birds fluttered from tree to tree. Everything looked normal, but inside him everything had changed. He held his phone in his hand, staring at a number he hadn't dialed in months. It was her number, Anita. She was the girl he had once loved deeply, the one he had left behind because his parents said she wasn't his class. A decision he had regretted in silence. He took a deep breath and pressed call. The phone rang. Once. Then she answered. "Hello." James closed his eyes briefly, then said, "Hi, Anita. It's James. I don't know if this is the right time, but I wanted to talk. If you're open." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Anita said quietly, "I never thought I'd hear from you again." James smiled sadly. "I never thought I'd have the courage to call." "I'm listening," she said. And so he told her everything. Not about the hospital or the patient, but about himself. About the pressure, the fear, the choices he made to please others. How much he had missed her. How much he regretted walking away from what he believed in. Anita didn't speak for a while. Then she said softly, "James, people change. But it's not too late to be true to yourself." Those words echoed everything Jeremiah had said. And James knew he was finally listening. That evening, James pulled out his old sketchbook from the bottom drawer of his cabinet. It was covered in dust, the pages curled slightly at the corners. He hadn't touched it in over 3 years. He opened it to a blank page and stared at it for a long time. Then slowly his fingers moved. He drew. Not for work. Not for anyone else. Just for himself. The strokes were shaky at first, uncertain, rusty. But as he continued, something inside him relaxed. His heart found rhythm. His mind found quiet. His spirit found light. Jeremiah had been right. Drawing reminded him who he was. And who he still could be. A week later, James attended Mr. Jeremiah's burial. It was a simple ceremony. No large crowd, no choir, no camera crew. Just a few hospital staff, a social worker, and one distant relative who barely spoke. James stood by the grave, holding a folded piece of paper. When it was time to speak, he stepped forward. "I didn't know Mr. Jeremiah for long," he began, "but in the short time we spoke, he gave me something no one else ever did. Permission to be myself." He unfolded the note and read it aloud. "After God, listen to yourself. Your peace is in your truth. And your truth is always whispering." He placed the note on the casket and stepped back. In the days that followed, James felt lighter. He didn't quit his job. He didn't run away or make any dramatic decisions. But he changed subtly, steadily. He started saying no more often. He began drawing every weekend. He called Anita once a week. And most importantly, he stopped apologizing for being himself. The world didn't applaud, but his soul did. He carried Jeremiah's words like a compass, guiding his choices. And every time he was tempted to silence his own voice, he remembered the man with the frail hands and the strong heart. Months later, James stood in front of a group of medical interns during a training session. They were young, eager, just like he once was. He smiled and said, "You'll learn about the human body. You'll master anatomy, treatment plans, and diagnosis. He paused, then added, but there's something more important you'll have to learn by yourself: how to listen. Not just to patients, but to yourself. The interns looked puzzled. James chuckled. One day you'll understand. And he meant it. Because some lessons aren't written in textbooks. Some are whispered by dying men with nothing left to lose, but everything to give. James got home that evening feeling calm. The apartment hadn't changed, but something inside him had. He walked into his living room, kicked off his shoes, and looked around. The framed degree on the wall. The sterile bookshelves. The untouched piano in the corner. He walked over to the piano slowly and lifted the lid. He hadn't played in years. Not since med school drowned him in schedules and expectations. He placed his fingers on the keys. The first note was shaky. The next one steadier. Then a melody poured out. Soft, hesitant but beautiful. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. Later that night, James opened his journal and began writing. He started with a date. Then a name, Mr. Jeremiah Obasai. Under it he wrote, "The man who reminded me to live." Each page that followed was a memory. His last night with Jeremiah, the conversations, the laughter, the silence. But it also became more. A collection of everything James had forgotten about himself. His passions. His pain. His dreams. He wrote until his hand ached and his eyes blurred. When he finished, he whispered to the empty room, "Thank you, sir." And for the first time in a long while, he slept deeply. Weeks passed. Anita and James met for coffee. It was awkward at first. They talked like old friends. Careful, polite. But slowly the walls softened. He asked her about her art gallery. She asked him about the hospital. They laughed about the old days. Then she looked at him and said, "You're different now." James smiled. "I feel different. I finally stopped trying to be everyone else." Anita sipped her coffee and said, "That's the man I fell in love with." James's heart skipped. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a restart. But it was something. And that was enough for now. James started volunteering at a local youth center on weekends. He didn't go as a doctor, but as a mentor. Young boys gathered around him as he told them stories. Not from textbooks, but from life. One Saturday a boy asked, "How do you know who you really are?" James paused. Then he said, "Start by sitting alone. No phone. No music. Just silence. And listen. If you're scared of what you hear, it means you're close." The boy blinked. "Close to what?" James smiled softly. "Your truth." The room went quiet. And in that silence, something sacred stirred. At the hospital, things began to shift too. James started treating patients with a new level of presence. He listened, not just to symptoms but to silences between words. One morning, a young woman cried during her checkup. She whispered, "I'm tired of pretending." James didn't rush her. He didn't interrupt. He just sat there and said, "You're safe. You don't have to pretend here." She broke down. And when she left that day, she smiled through tears and said, "Thank you for seeing me." James watched her go, his heart full. This was what healing looked like, on both sides of the stethoscope. On a quiet Sunday, James visited the cemetery again. He brought fresh white lilies, Jeremiah's favorite. The grass was neatly trimmed, the sun warm. He stood by the grave and spoke softly. "I've kept my promise. I'm listening now. I'm creating again. And I'm not afraid of silence anymore." He placed the flowers down and sat on the grass. Birds chirped above. A breeze rustled the trees. Then he whispered, "You didn't die for nothing. Your words are alive in me. And I'll keep them alive in others." The wind seemed to nod in reply. James closed his eyes and smiled. James decided to compile Jeremiah's lessons into a book. Not for profit but for purpose. He titled it Before the Clock Stops. Each chapter carried a story, a message, a truth. He wrote every evening after work. Sometimes he cried. Sometimes he laughed. but every word was honest. When he finished, he printed 10 copies and donated them to libraries, schools, and the hospital. Inside each was a handwritten note. This book is not about death. It's about remembering how to live. His heart felt light. And for the first time in years he felt proud. Deep, quiet, lasting pride. One night, while watching the sunset from his balcony, James called his mother. She answered with her usual stern tone. "James, is everything all right?" He smiled. "Yes, Mum. Everything's finally all right." They spoke for a while. About life. About expectations. About forgiveness. He said, "I know you wanted the best for me. But I need to define best for myself now." His mother was silent for a moment. Then she said quietly, "I understand, son. I may not agree with everything, but I'm proud you found your voice." James nodded, tears in his eyes. "That's all I needed to hear." Time moved on. Seasons changed. James continued living simply. More intentionally. The weight of performance no longer sat on his shoulders. He still had bad days. He still felt pressure. But he now had something stronger, a compass. One evening he stood before a mirror, really looking at himself. Not the doctor. Not the achiever. "Just James," he said aloud. "You're not perfect. But you're real. And that's enough." His reflection didn't argue. Nodded, finally in agreement. A year after Mr. Jeremiah's passing, the hospital hosted a memorial for patients who died without family. James was invited to speak. He stepped onto the small podium and looked at the crowd. Then he said, "Sometimes the people who impact us most are the ones we least expect." He told Jeremiah's story. Simple, honest, raw. Then he ended with the line that had changed his life. "After God, listen to yourself." The hall was silent. And in that silence, Jeremiah lived again. James never forgot that night. Even years later, he'd find himself whispering those words before making a big decision. They became his guidepost. At conferences, when doctors asked how he balanced life and purpose, he shared the story of the old man in Ward 7. Some rolled their eyes. Others took notes. But a few approached him afterward with tears in their eyes. "I needed that," they'd say. And he always smiled and replied, "So did I." One rainy evening, James got a message from Anita. "Can we talk?" They met under a canopy near her gallery. The rain danced on the roof above them. She looked into his eyes and said, "I'm ready." "If you are." James reached for her hand, warm and steady. "I've been ready," he said softly. And just like that, something sacred resumed. Not forced. Not rushed. Just right. Years later, James and Anita opened a wellness retreat. Part art therapy, part health education. They called it the listening place. People came from far and wide. Not for medicine but for meaning. For silence. For truth. On the entrance wall hung a quote carved in wood. "After God, listen to yourself." Jeremiah Obasai. People often paused to read it. Some took photos. Some cried. But all walked in changed. James grew older. His hair grayed. His voice deepened. But his heart remained young. He would sit under a tree outside the retreat, sketching and talking to guests. Sometimes children would ask, "Who's Jeremiah?" He'd smile and say, "A friend I met on his last night. He gave me a gift I'm still unwrapping." And they'd listen. Because truth, when spoken softly, travels farther than sound. One quiet morning, James sat alone with his sketchbook. He drew a wrinkled hand holding a stethoscope. Below it he wrote, "Healing is not always found in medicine. Sometimes it's found in words." He looked out at the hills, the trees, the retreat he built from a dying man's wisdom. He whispered, "You saved me, Jeremiah." And he meant it with every part of his soul. James passed away many years later, peacefully in his sleep, just like the man who changed his life. Beside his bed was his journal. Inside the first page read, "After God, listen to yourself." It became his final message. At his funeral, Anita stood holding that journal. She read excerpts aloud, her voice strong and tender. "This isn't just James's story," she said. "It's a reminder for all of us to pause, to listen, to choose truth over noise." She placed the journal on the casket, just like James had once done, and walked away, smiling through tears. Years later, a young doctor found the book before the clock stops in a dusty library corner. She read it in one sitting, tears streaming down her face. She whispered, "I've been waiting for something like this." And in that moment, another heart was changed. Please subscribe.